Hey everybody, hope you're staying in, staying safe, enjoying times, with your loved ones or alone or, however you're dealing with this. Um, my last video on comic book marketing seemed to have struck a nerve. It was shared on several websites and got a lot of viewership. So I thought I would talk about how comics should be marketed. Now, I'm no marketing genius. I'm no salesman, but I know people who are really good at it. And I worked with people who are really good at it. And they pretty much, well, let me tell you the story. Everything's about history. That's how we learn about the present. Um, Late 70s, well, mid 70s, all the way through the 80s, there was a comic book company, an independent comic book company called Eclipse Comics. And it was eventually centered out of Forestville, California. And it is an indelible piece of comic book history. They're a very prolific publisher, published a wide variety of genres, and broke all the rules. And Eclipse was born um, basically, well, not basically, entirely because of these two guys. This is Jan and Dean Mullaney, and they are the founders of Eclipse Comics. I don't know a lot about Jan's background. I know he's involved in the music business in a big way. That was his background. Dean's background was, you know, economics. He worked on Wall Street for a couple of days, decided he didn't like it. He worked at Marvel Comics for a couple of days, decided he didn't like it. He didn't like how things were done. Dean, the gentleman on the right here, um, is is and always has been a rebel, a rule breaker, a thumb in the eye of the establishment. That's the kind of guy he is. And he and Jan decided that they didn't like the way the comic book industry was being run, so they were going to do something on their own. And they did. They borrowed 2,000 bucks from their mom and they published Saber. It was a hardcover graphic novel by Don McGregor and Paul Galassi, two established talents who were working at Marvel at the time. Um, and Saber is extraordinarily important in the history of comics because it is the first independently produced graphic novel, the first independently produced comic book. Didn't come from an established publisher, just came from two guys on Staten Island who were tired of the way things were being done in comics. And they published it on their own and they sold it through a weekly newspaper called the Comics Buyer's Guide. And they sold directly to fandom, this brand new project by two known talents. And they also sold it at a discount to the very few comic book shops that were in existence in the 70s. They sold it at conventions, they sold it wherever they could sell it. They worked the phones, they worked the streets, they worked everywhere they could. And they pushed this comic, and it was enormously successful. Pretty much, these two guys created the direct market. Now, they were selling directly to retailers, comic book retailers, directly to the fans. Um, and there were no distributors. They were doing it all on their own. Just a couple of cowboys making up the rules as they went. Um, but their success, you know, led to other things. Like they began to build a company, a comic book company with regular periodical publications. And they did things like that no other comic book company ever did. They advertised outside of the comic book realm. They didn't rely on in-house ads or ads in the buyer's guide. They advertised in real magazines that regular people read, reaching out to a new audience, reaching out to to find new niches to market to. It had never been done before, and trust me, it's never been done since. Well, comic book companies need staff, and the first hire was Cat Ironwood. Cat Ironwood was a longtime letter hack and Uber fan and columnist for the Comic Book Buyer's Guide, and very opinionated lady. I really enjoyed working with her. She loves comics. Uh, some of the debates would get heated between her and I, but you know, we both were after the same thing, creating quality work. And so she was an important addition, basically the editorial end of Eclipse Comics. Dean edited some comics on her own, but the bulk of the line for the entire time the company was in existence as a monthly periodical publisher, that fell to Cat. And she served as art director, de facto art director, editor in chief, whatever needed to be done. She did it. Eclipse was a small outfit, a lean outfit. I don't think at any one time they had more than 6 or 7 people working for them full time, even at the peak of their sales. Now, another major addition to making this company tick was Beau Smith, my buddy Beau. In the 1980s comics and into the 1990s, when he went to work for Todd McFarlane, Beau, the watchword in comic book retailing was, "I know Beau." Everyone knew Beau. Beau is also a letter hack. He was a salesman as well, professionally, and he was hired on to Eclipse to be their marketing guy. And he was introduced to Dean Mullaney by Tim Truman, who was doing work at the time on his book Scout for Eclipse. And Beau put a different face on Eclipse. the Eclipse was kind of hippie-ish. It was seen as kind of hippie-ish, and it kind of earned that reputation. It came out of California. Dean and Cat looked like hippies, though they weren't hippies. They were communists. And I'm not telling tales out of school. Cat explained to me why she was a communist. That's the source of many of the heated debates that she and I would have. Anyway, Beau is from West Virginia, just the nicest damn guy you'd ever want to meet. He's great with people, and he just sort of put a different face on the company, or I should say, he balanced. He was the balance to Dean Mullaney's sometimes brusque, blunt New York approach to things. So you had these two guys, who form the core of the marketing. Dean and Beau worked hand in hand to push these comics, and Beau would give, he knew every retailer. If you owned a rinky-dink shop that was under 200 square feet, Beau knew you. He would talk to you on the phone. He would find out about you. He knew the names of your kids. He knew the name of your dog. He knew what your interests were, and he would talk to you. And it's because he's a friendly guy. He liked people. And he was just great at pushing the product. Dean would just give it to him, and he found a way to get that into stores. And so, Cat and Dean working together, they build this tremendous line of comics. It's as diverse as it is possible to imagine. They weren't the first publisher of the Rocketeer, but they continued the Rocketeer when the first publisher went into bankruptcy. And they published Reed Fleming, The World's Toughest Milkman. And they published it because they published this book. It is a funny book if you've never read it, but unusual in a market where X-Men, and G.I. Joe were the #1 selling titles at the time. Here comes, a comic book about a milkman who fights with everybody. And Dean ran into Reed Fleming at a con. He saw the work, loved it, encouraged him to create comics for Eclipse. And it's just brilliant stuff. Alan Moore's Miracle Man, another effort from Eclipse that was a huge seller for the company, and an often controversial title. And I'll talk about controversy in Eclipse as we go along. But Eclipse embraced controversy. They loved controversy because controversy is another way to market. Gru is another title they took over from another publisher and continued for a while. Sergio Aragonés and Mark Evaniers, barbarian satire. And also, Eclipse was the first American company to introduce manga to the United States audience. The series of extremely successful manga titles that they published under the Eclipse banner. My own involvement with Eclipse I was perhaps their most prolific writer there for a few years. I worked on the 50-issue series Airboy for them. It was a big seller for them, a lot of fun to work on, and even better for me was I worked on Eclipse's adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, which continues to be a worldwide bestseller to this day. And Dean put the deal together um, against the will of the Tolkien estate. They didn't like comic books, but Dean made it happen because he doesn't take no for an answer. And he got a contract for me that Dean was great with contracts in a way that his contracts favored the creator. He created the creator-owned contract. If you have ever signed a creator-owned contract, the deal is kind of standard. You form a partnership with the publisher. The publisher has the rights for 5 years. All rights return to you after that time. All those things, all of these things that we now see in every creator-owned contract, Dean was the first to do that. Also in his contracts were that if Eclipse were to go out of business and any other publisher were to take over the property, you were still owed the royalties. Your contract was in place, ironclad, no matter who published the work, which was a real lifesaver for me personally on The Hobbit, because The Hobbit is published all over the world by a whole bunch of different publishers, but they still have to honor that contract. So Bilbo Baggins has to send me a check twice a year, every year. And this has been going on since the comic came out. This is 30 years of royalties. Thank you, Dean. Okay. So, I did a few creator-owned things for them. I did Winterworld, a number of other titles. The most profitable I did was this book called Radio Boy. It was a one-shot satire on Japanese manga. Penciled by me, inked by Jim Engel, some backups by my buddy Flynn Henry. And the Eclipse deal was if you brought them the property, they didn't put it out any money at first for things like this. You brought them the property and they split the net profits with you down the middle. And this was done at the height of the black and white glut. Yes, kids, black and white comics were really popular in the 80s for some reason. No one knew why, but everybody leaned into it. And Eclipse leaned into it big time. They had whole lines of black and white comics. I think it was Ninja Turtles got the ball rolling. And for some reason, readers liked black and white comics. I did this one, and it was my biggest payday to that date. I'd only been in comics a couple of years, and all of a sudden, I got a 5-figure royalty check, which stunned the heck out of me. But, again, thank you, Dean. That was the beauty of Eclipse, is that they looked out for the talent. Now that's got nothing to do with marketing, but in a way it does, because they sold us, they pushed us, they promoted us, they promoted their talent. We were the stars at Eclipse, and they flew us to conventions and store appearances, and wherever we went, wherever we made an appearance, you just called Eclipse and said, hey, I need this, I need that, and all the support was there for you. If it was posters or pins or whatever the hell. Comics, they would just send cases of comics. That's the other thing that Dean did. Once the comic book distribution system was set up, and you had Diamond, and you had Capital, and you had Heroes World, and all the other different distributors, Dean figured out a way to work them. Dean with Bo would work with the retailers and do simple things that seem very simple but were very, very smart. they would overship comics. If they had a #1 that they thought had potential, and a dealer ordered, say, 50 copies, they would send them 100. And they'd say, look, you know, you can return any ones you don't sell, and we're not going to bill you for the other 50 unless you sell them. And the idea being that in the comic shops, if a comic shop only orders 10 copies of your comic, generally it'll sell out on Wednesday, or at least it'll sell out by the weekend. Readers won't be aware of it. But Dean would overship to make sure there were copies on the stands when the weekend crowd came in. And from what I understand, overshipping always worked. You know, the retailers were happy. They sold more copies, and they weren't out of pocket for them till they sold them. You know, it's simple things like that that put Eclipse over the top. And as I said, they promoted their talent. Jan and Dean's other passion was trading cards. And they kind of got into the trading card market with these collectible comic creator trading cards. And just like a baseball card or a basketball card, they had a picture of the creator on the front, and then their stats on the back, you know, things they had worked on. And, you know, these were, you know, it was reasonably successful. But Dean loved trading cards, and he was committed to doing more. So he did the really notorious serial killer trading cards. And again, picture on the front, stats on the back. And the beauty of it is this got all kinds of media attention. And I remember Cat and Dean just being so surprised that these would cause any kind of controversy. Of course they weren't surprised. They courted controversy. They knew that the controversy would sell these things. I vividly recall Dean, I believe it was on a Today Show or Good Morning America. He's on the air, just evincing shock, you know, like Claude Rains in Casablanca, that I don't know why these are causing so much outrage. So, but they continued their love affair with trading cards with more, well, let's say worthy entries. They did a series of AIDS awareness trading cards. I mean, that's they were far ahead of their time on that issue, and I think this was a real, you know, project. A passion for Dean was a series of trading cards featuring the stars of the old Negro baseball leagues. If you want to know about Negro baseball leagues, there's other places to look. Excellent book by Mark Chiarello. But these guys, obviously, because segregation in baseball and the rest of it throughout the 30s and 40s and early 50s, these guys never got trading cards, and Dean fixed that. I think that's pretty cool. So anyway, I've had a long time friendship with Dean. He's a guy I admire. He's a guy I learned a lot from. I mean, he taught me everything I know about marketing, but he didn't teach me everything he knows. I always said that Dean was a bit of a pirate, and I mean that in the best sense. Well, heck, he looks like a pirate, but other than that, he's a pirate in the best sense of the word, because pirates were rule breakers. They made their own rules. They fought against conventional thought, and most importantly, they were loyal. They were loyal to one another, and they were democratic. They didn't do anything until everybody agreed to do it. So Dean pretty much ran Eclipse as the captain of a pirate ship, and we just sort of sailed the seas of comic book retailing, doing as we wished. Pissing people off, raiding other companies for talent, and it was just an incredibly fun time. And today, Dean is still in the comics business. He's the publisher of the American Library of Comics. These books are the be-all, end-all of comic strip collections. I can't imagine anything, any product better than these. Has the strips run in order from the beginning. They're perfectly restored, presented with forwards and ancillary material. They're simply, each one of the books is a delight and a feast for comic book fans. So that's an ad for what Dean's doing. Here's an ad for me. If you like these more instructional kind of videos that I'm doing, there's a lot of these on Unauthorized TV. It is a subscription service, but you head on over there, and I've got a whole ton of videos there, and there will be a lot more coming in the future. I've got about 20 in the bag, ready to go. So anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're well and you're happy, and I will see you down the road.